Hey, well, good evening and welcome to another Is There More to Life Than Netflix, where me and my good friend here, Andy, talk about things around the meaning of life and Christianity and faith. And we're here especially for those who are curious or skeptical about Christianity. We love to talk to people about Christianity, especially those who've got questions, who want to challenge it, who want to learn more about it. So that's why we're here. We're here for you. And tonight we are so hot. So I'm up in North Liverpool in Crosby, in the top room in our house, in our little home office, and it is so unbelievably hot here. Andy, you're down in Mackworth in Derby. What's the temperature like?
We've been all right today. Like, genuinely, it looks kind of even overcast today. So yeah, I mean, the last few days have been sweltering, although not as bad as London, I have heard. But yeah, no, we've been all right. Today has been cool. There's been a refreshing breeze. So sorry if anybody's stuck in a 32-degree house somewhere, but we've been okay today. Opened the patio doors this morning, and the breeze just flowed into the house. It's a wonderful thing.
Oh, amazing! That's lovely. No, I did. Down. It's definitely hot here because I went out just to get some shopping. I was like, I could barely walk. Just like so.
Wow.
I'm just like sweat soup. So what will happen if you're watching this is you'll just see my face gradually melt during the evening. But it is lovely to have you with us. And each week we discuss a different question posed by someone who's not a Christian. Or
Dave, somebody has just liked that. I don't know if they just like the fact of seeing your face melt. Like the first thumb just came up.
It did at that moment. I think there is something like a 30-second lag between me saying this and those likes happening. But maybe someone wants to see my face melt. Maybe that would be really exciting. So yeah, what we do each week is we take a question by someone who's not a Christian or new to Christianity, who wants to kind of talk about this stuff. And this week it comes from Nigel, my friend Nigel, who is he's new to Christianity. This is all kind of new to him. And when we were chatting this week, he brought up the fact, something he's mentioned before actually, is that what kept him from becoming a Christian for years and years and years is he thought it was all about rules and regulations. And he actually liked a lot of this stuff about Christianity. He was really curious about it, but he thought, if I become a Christian, I'm going to have to keep hundreds of rules and all these regulations. It's going to restrict me. It's going to hold me back, all this kind of stuff. And then, in his own words, then he discovered that he's never been so free. So what we want to talk about tonight is this whole idea of, common conception that Christians are repressed. They're actually, pushing down their true selves. They've got to follow all these rules. They're not free to be who they truly are. All of that kind of stuff comes up really, really commonly. So we'll do what we normally do is we'll look at pop culture, we'll look at what people think on the street, all that kind of thing about this issue. And then we'll look at, as a pair of Christians, what Christianity actually has to say to that kind of stuff. But as always, we want to really encourage you to pop your questions and your thoughts and your comments in the comments if you're watching live, even if you're watching later, because it can help inform future programs, all that kind of stuff. So do comment along. It's really good fun when you do join in. And thank you for joining us on such a sweltering night. It's wonderful to have you with us. Hopefully you will enjoy this evening as we discover whether Andy and I are deeply repressed or actually might have some kind of freedom. Feel repressed, Andy?
Not this evening particularly, but we might unpack some deep repression. I don't know. We'll see where we go. We never know.
Maybe tonight will turn into therapy. That'll be fun.
It could be, yeah. Public therapy in front of lots of people.
Honestly, in this kind of heat, I could end up weeping before the end of it. But anyway, so first, let's talk about kind of how this gets represented in common culture, and I think. Something that absolutely everyone in the world now will know and probably illustrates this brilliantly in the words of Elsa, "Let it go, let it go." And I hold my head up high with great pride that I'm one of the few people in the world who's alive right now who's managed to get away with not watching Frozen. And it's now become almost like a point of pride where I'm not going to do it. So Andy, I'm going to pass to you. Tell us about that song, where it comes from, and why you think it's become so popular.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just it's a wonderful moment in the film where she decides to kind of go her own way, and she takes her hair down and she starts singing while her village is plunged into an eternal winter. But she's finding herself. She's letting it go. She's saying, "There's no right, there's no wrong, there's no rules for me. I'm free." And what's interesting, I think, is that if you watch loads of films, particularly kind of Disney type films, a lot of it is about people finding themselves, about kind of breaking away from their parents' expectations of themselves, breaking away from their tribe's expectation of themselves, going off and finding themselves. It's kind of like when we say "you do you," and and it's just something that's not just modern, but it definitely resonates with people today. It's a bit like kind of Frank Sinatra's "I Did It My Way." It's that kind of thing. You go and do you. Do whatever you like. Don't worry about anybody else. And so I think that resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's worth pointing out this isn't historic. So, recently, so I'm a massive Pixar fan, especially, and so watching Zootropolis, and the hero story in that is this whole thing of these animals who are supposed to stick to their areas and do what they're supposed to do, but there's this bunny who's the main character who wants to be in the police, and it's a bunny can't be in the police, you've got to be big and scary to be in the police, all that kind of thing. And there's another character in it who's like a mouse or something and wants to be an elephant, and he's like, you can't be an elephant, you're not an elephant. And of course, the moral of the whole thing is you can be whatever you want to be. It's really similar, and there's this kind of hero's journey, especially in kids films, but across the board, of radical individualism, of being yourself, of setting yourself free. And in other times of history and other cultures, it would be almost the opposite story. It would be the person who sacrificed what they wanted for the sake of everyone else. And actually, we still do have those stories. We still do have a lot of films where, people sacrifice their lives or what they wanted to do for the sake of other people. But more and more recently, it's become actually, the person who represses their own desires for the sake of other people is kind of the sad character, the really unfortunate one. My friends who know me, some of whom will be watching tonight, know that I have a passionate hatred of the film Love Actually, and so much. And the reason is because it, for my own understanding of love, it defines love awfully, because actually pretty much the only genuine description of love in there is this woman who has a disabled brother, and she takes care of him, and basically she sacrifices fun with the hot guy and the big muscles in order to take care of her brother. And hers is seen as this incredibly sad story in the middle of it. But actually, as historically and certainly Christianly, the way that we understand love, she's probably the only one in it demonstrating actual genuine love, because she is laying down herself for others. But to go back to the kind of pop culture understanding of freedom and what it is to live a full human life, we do the reason we talk about films and stuff so much is because films kind of reflect and also inform our culture as to what a hero is. So story itself is kind of neutral, and what you put into it is your own values. And so if the hero story in Zootropolis and Frozen is to break free and be who you want to be and all that kind of stuff, and people resonate with that, and the most popular song is Let It Go, basically forget everyone else, that tells us something about what we understand in our cultural moment as to what it means to be a good human being, to be flourishing, to live well. And the lesson seems to be, do what you want to do, be free, do not be repressed by outside rules. And so this whole thing of looking at Christianity and going, they're going to tell me how to live, that's actually becoming quite a controversial thing to kind of say. When I was thinking about this beforehand, one of the things that popped to mind is, if you're about my age, you'll remember the Primal Scream song Loaded, and it starts off with a clip from a film where they say, what is it you want to do? And it says, we want to be free. We want to be free to do what we want to do, and we want to get loaded, and we want to have a good time, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a party. So I looked it up, and that clip is from a film, 60s or 70s film called The Wild Angels. It's about biker gangs and stuff. And you can watch the clip of it on YouTube. It's really interesting because it's actually, the context is a bunch of bikers confronting a preacher who's holding a funeral, and he's basically they're kind of challenging this preacher, for being this terrible authority figure who's kind of repressing everyone, and actually they want to be free and they want to party. And apparently what happens next is there's basically an orgy in this church where this funeral's happening. Haven't watched it, just to
wow. Well, there you go. There we go. That's a bit Tarantino. That's a bit Tarantino-esque, isn't it?
It's very Tarantino-esque.
Before his time.
Yeah, completely. So and that kind of that's interesting on so many levels, because one, comes from a great Primal Scream thing, but like so many people resonate with and can remember that sample type thing. But then it's sampled from a film which comes from 60s and 70s era where this really kicked off, that kind of like radical freedom, free love movement, all that kind of stuff. This idea of casting off the constraints and stuff. And the Western world had come out of 2 world wars and basically wanted to put its middle finger up at the generation that had created all this chaos, and it was going to be by freedom. That's how they're going to do it. And then if you kind of carry on looking at representations of religion in pop culture and films and how people understand it. So one thing that springs to my mind that's popular at the moment is, The Handmaid's Tale. And basically there, religion is the vehicle by which the people are oppressed and kept under the control. And especially like the way, women are oppressed, like religion is like this control thing. It's not a liberating force. It's an oppressive force. I kind of started running out of ideas at that point, Andy. Can you think of any other kind of pop culture or common understandings of what religion feels like and what it does to people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's definitely a sense of repression is definitely seen as the worst possible thing, isn't it? What was the follow-on from the Harry Potter films? The one with the guy the Scamander. I can't remember. It's the guy with the little bag of
Scamander. It's the Fantastical Beasts.
That's the one. And the first one of that, is basically what happens if somebody represses themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like the whole thing just goes mad. And I remember watching it, and again, it's that same thing. If you repress yourself, it's not just bad for you, but everything is going to go wrong. And that wizard represses himself, and I think that idea of repression, that not being true to who you are, just so contradicts what people expect, and it just subtly drip fed into us, I think, all the time. But I do think there are some interesting questions actually around who you are. So I can't remember if we've done this before, but an example might be, we have conflicting desires. So I want to look fit and healthy and strong. That's one of my desires. But I also have a desire where I really like ice cream. And so which one of those desires do I be true to? Which one of those kind of, when am I more free? Am I more free when I'm eating a tub of ice cream? Am I more free when I'm repressing that desire in order to stay fitter and healthier? And I eat ice cream sometimes, but not too much of it. But, it's a very simple example, but actually both of those are what I desire. Like both of them are kind of what I want to be, but I have to kind of repress one of those in order to go for the other one. I have to repress the desire to be fit and healthy, or I repress the desire for ice cream, or I do a little bit of both, which is probably what I go down. But I think it's a really simple example that actually, it's not about, I can't remember who it was, and we're very early on, but again, it's a Keller reference. So we're only 13 minutes in, but he says real freedom comes from a strategic loss of some freedoms in order to gain others. So real freedom comes, you've always got to choose. So we just have to choose which ones we're going to go for. You can't have complete freedom in that way, which I think is a really interesting thought.
Yeah, no, that's really, really fascinating. Is this like early on in lockdown, like one of the things doing the rounds was like, everyone's going to come out of this either was it a hunk, chunk, or a drunk,
or a monk.
Or a monk, that was it, yeah, or a monk. It's this idea like
a chunky drunk, a chunky monk, a drunky monk. I mean, people kind of adding them together, really.
Yeah. And it was like people kind of acknowledging that, you're going to have to pick your path down this, you couldn't have everything you wanted. You couldn't eat and drink everything you wanted and have a six pack, it's that kind of thing. And it's, who's, like you say, who is the most free? Is it the person, is it Nigella Lawson, all about the food, eating all the food she wants and celebrating food, all that kind of stuff, or is it the Instagram fitness gurus who've got 1% body fat and 8 packs and you know what I mean, like that kind of who's the most free, like which one is it? And they say, but like you could not be both. You cannot be Nigella Lawson and the fitness guru on Instagram, as much as you might try to do it. I never trust a thin chef. Do you know what I mean? Like,
like a barber with a bad haircut. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? I guess. Yeah.
completely. Yeah. So yeah, it's that whole kind of thing. So I mean, one thing to look at is like where did this come from? Like we said a little bit, like in popular movement wise in the 60s and 70s, you had for the first time kind of teenagers with money and a bit of autonomy, and they wanted to really run with that, and they wanted there to be freedom and love after so many wars and all that kind of thing. And actually, rather than all this repression, want to be free. There was a United States Supreme Court challenge in 1992. And when it gets to the Supreme Court, it kind of starts getting to, what does it mean to be a free society, what it means to be human type level. And one of the things that came out in that court case was this statement that at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and of the mystery of human life, which kind of takes the Elsa thing of like, I want to let my hair down and be who I want to be, and goes to the next level, which says, in fact, that the universe is whatever I say it is. Like, it's however I understand it to be. That's like incredibly radical understanding of like individual freedom type thing.
Yeah. And I suppose there's a, my history is not good enough, but there's a kind of a gradual progression of this, isn't there? And I think we would want to argue that some of these things are good. So the traditional understanding of identity would have been that you would have basically done the job that your parents had done. You would have sacrificed for your tribe or your group or your country, and some of those things worked out very well. But if you were in a minority of some form, if you were a woman, basically you had kids and that was it, and there was no other choice. Or if you were a minority ethnic person, or if there were other things, that you could be massively restricted in that way. And so it's not that we want to hark back to this golden era of traditional identity formation or whatever. There have been good things, but I think what we would say has happened is that gradually it's been moved towards an extreme. So you want to, there is such a thing as freedom, and I think our culture understands freedom as freedom from, but there's also the freedom for, which we might want to talk about in a minute. But I think we want to affirm that there are good things, and the Christian faith would speak into some of those things. Freedom from slavery, freedom from sin, freedom from various forms of oppression and injustice. We would want to be pro many of those things. But I think once you begin to define the universe, there was the old thing, wasn't it, that used to prepare the child for the road. And now, so you prepare the child for the road, but now often people want to prepare the road for the child. So it's not just like you prepare somebody for what's ahead of them, but actually you have to say, the whole world has to adapt itself to whatever somebody says that they are, or those sorts of things. And I think that's where we've gone in a very interesting and difficult direction.
Yeah, which is, if we get back to that Supreme Court ruling, that's, the road has to be prepared for me, because the road is what I say the road should be. It's that really extreme understanding of freedom of like, actually I'm going to tell the road what to be, and it has to be the way I want it to be, and it has to move for me. And then we get in the situation where everyone is kind of defining reality for themselves, and that kind of leads to problems. But if it's all right, I just want to pause for a second and go back to this kind of idea of positive freedom.
Go for it.
Because it's worth kind of lingering on for a second, because it could sound like exactly what you're saying, that actually Christians are like, do you know what, repression and oppression is exactly what we need, and let me tell you why we need that. And I'm sure there are some people who might come a bit close to that kind of understanding of things. But like, if we go, look at some people, one of the things that's happening now is we're kind of highlighting people in the past who would have be seen as troublemakers at the time, and actually recognizing a kind of courage in what they did, and how they actually created liberty and freedom for other people. So you'll take so it's like watching a mini doc on Florence Nightingale the other day, because I actually didn't know that much about her, and
she's got a few hospitals now, hasn't she?
Yeah, she's like, she was pretty courageous and pretty strong-minded, and like she basically created nursing, more or less. If this documentary is right that I watched, people didn't really do that before, in the sense that we understand it. But she went into these war situations. She had a passion for medicine, and she took care of soldiers. And basically massively reduced the death rate through it, and then recruited nurses, although that wasn't a thing at the time, and brought them along, and created this new profession which massively reduced the death rate, saved thousands of lives. But to do it, she had to decide not to get married and not to be someone's wife. She had to kind of stay single. She had to go against everyone's understanding of how the world works. She had to fight the whole way through. Have this amazing kind of insight and imagination, but also just stand up against lots and lots of people. And you've got to say the result of that has been phenomenally good. Modern nursing still does an enormous amount of good, and it basically came from this woman, let alone the lives she saved in her time. But to do it, she had to basically fight the norms of what it meant to be a woman in her time. And then she became like this standard bearer for other women, who didn't just have to stay at home and look after the house, but actually were, incredibly gifted and talented and able to do things that were, restricted to men. And then what's that other film, Hidden Figures, which is about the group of black women who were the secret mathematicians behind the rocket science that sent US astronauts into space. And they weren't even allowed to use the same bathrooms as the white people at the time, but yet they just pushed on through every kind of thing that was against them in order to do that. And I think it's fair to say, we would say that the people who did that, who broke the norms, were doing a good thing, and the freedom that they fought for was actually positive and actually helped a lot of people.
Definitely. Yeah, that's right, and I think you just have to own that. Otherwise, you can say, that you can sound like Christians want to hark back to the 1950s or the 1930s as this golden era, which is not the case. There are some things that we would want to affirm, but there's a whole bunch of things that we'd say, actually, no, we're far better off in 2020.
Yeah, I got very soapboxy then. I never do that in normal life, but for some reason, stream me on Facebook or YouTube and suddenly I start soapboxy.
Like a public pulpit, like you've suddenly got a public pulpit you can preach from.
Everyone's listening to me. But as is scrolling along the bottom of the screen right now, please do add your own thoughts and comments on this idea of freedom and repression and rules and restrictions, and where the place that religion's played its part in it, and especially your comments and your questions really help to get this going. So massively encourage you to do that, whatever you're thinking. Don't wait right to the end, which is what normally happens, and then we get a flurry in the last 5 minutes. Do it now. So but anyway, but as I was kind of like talking about those people's stories, I just realized something, actually, that what they did, the freedoms they fought for, wasn't for themselves. It was for other people and for the good of other people. Which is quite different to some of the stuff we're talking about now, where actually the freedom is because that's who I am and what I want to be. These were actually freedoms that were for the good of the whole. So again, we get to that idea of actually, of a hero story that's, even though it's fighting for freedom and breaking, tradition and all that kind of stuff, it wasn't just for their own sake, it was for the sake of other people as well. I wonder if there's something in that, a sense of like what freedom is used for validates whether it's true freedom or not.
Do you think that's the difference between the freedom from and the freedom for? And I think we've touched on this before, but one of the challenges with that is if you don't know the purpose of an object, then you can't use it properly. So if you've got a hammer and you're using it as a kind of as a doorstop. I mean, it kind of works as a doorstop, but actually a hammer is meant to hammer things into the wall or whatever it is. And actually, as human beings, as a culture, particularly in the West, we don't really know what human beings are for anymore. I think in the past, as a kind of in the West, we were built on Christian values and Christian understanding. So we'd have said, actually, human beings are made for the glory of God. We're made for a relationship with Him. We're made to worship Him. That's our kind of purpose, our meaning. But there's no agreed purpose anymore for humans. And if you don't know what the purpose is, then you can't work out what they're meant to be doing. And therefore, it's very hard to actually work out what freedom looks like because you don't know where you're going. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we've talked about this idea of freedom from freedom fall before, so we actually kind of went away and found someone who's writing about it. So I've got the quote here. Eric from post-Enlightenment societies have discovered freedom from the constraints of nature and tradition, but they have not yet discovered freedom for the purpose of that freedom. So yeah, it's this idea of that freedom that we've kind of gotten to the point where it's like freedom is a virtue in its own sake. But actually freedom for its own sake can cause all kinds of problems. You know, someone who, you know, I don't want to take too extreme example, but, you know, think of any crime. Someone would have said, you know, I should have been free to steal that thing that I needed, or do damage to that person I didn't like, or just do damage to someone because it was fun. Do you know what I mean? Like that is a freedom, but it's not a good freedom. It's like, so yeah, there is this idea like freedom. We kind of already do know on some kind of level, we recognize that the situations in which freedom for freedom's sake isn't good. You know, I think like I once heard that the UK has the second most number of laws of any country in the world, only behind India, and that's because they kind of inherited our system and then went nuts with it. So actually, you know, we've got like all these gazillions of laws, which is actually like our society is built on the fact that you're not free to do anything you want to do. Actually, here's a bunch of stuff you can't do. You can't drive a car unless you've got a license. You can't go abroad unless you've got a passport. You can't, you know, all this kind of stuff. You can't work unless you're 16. These kind of rules and restrictions. And yet at a pop culture level, we celebrate anyone who breaks a tradition, breaks with oppression, frees themselves simply because they wanted to be free, simply because they wanted to do something. Whereas in past generations, that freedom was always working for some greater good. It was like a freedom for what that human being was for.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, isn't it? Because so I was sitting down with one of the students in you know, who's from St. Werburgh's, which is the church I've come from and part of, and he's an international student and he's from Malawi, and we were just talking really about the UK. He's been here for a year and kind of getting used to the weather, although he's actually quite enjoyed it the last few days. But he was talking really about the, you know, he finds it quite surprising how negative so many British people are about Britain, really, because, you know, although we're not, the UK system is not perfect by any stretch. There is is much less corruption than there are in terms of governmental levels and all those sorts of things, and you know, and so it's interesting that actually those laws are meant to create a freer society. And actually, one of the big problems is, of course, in various parts of the world where there is no police force, where there is no justice. I remember seeing a video, I think it was by International Justice Mission. They said, can you imagine making a call to the police? Somebody's breaking into your house and there's no police to call. You know, what do you do in that situation? Or you're a woman who's out walking in the countryside, and you know, you're in a country where, you know, you know that if anybody gets caught, nothing will ever happen because they'll just bribe their way out. And so although, you know, we do have a lot of those laws and things, actually the aim of them, and sometimes you can go over the top, but the aim of them is to create a place that's safe and free, I would have thought. And it's interesting that, you know, United States, you always, you know, their national anthem peaks, you know, kind of melodically, the land of the free, and by the way, the home of the brave, you know, because it brought us freedom. That's kind of their central narrative. And yet when you go to the US, and I've been there many times because my dad lives there, you know, everywhere this is a federal offense, this is a state offense. You know, if you tamper with the smoke detectors on the plane, it's a federal offense, and this might happen to you. If you step out of queue in the immigration queue, this is a federal offense. You know, federal offenses everywhere in order to try and preserve their freedom. You know, that they can be the land. You know, I've heard it said they're a land of the free, ruled by rules, which it's kind of ironic, but there is something in there.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's probably where a lot of the kind of pop culture levels ideas of freedom have really crept in, because you know, America is a country founded on kicking out the oppressors, which was us. If you would, Hamilton, yeah, that's kind of
show you my love, by killing your friends and family. I won't sing it, but you know.
Sending a fully armed battalion to show you my love. Yeah. And so, like, of course they're going to celebrate kicking out, you know, this terrible oppressive force, and then that leaks into all their stories and their music, and then that comes over here because we think it's cool, and then it kind of like, then it's in the water. yeah, and no doubt, I haven't looked into it this week, but no doubt this probably goes back to French. It always goes back to some French philosopher at some point, somewhere or other. And if it's not the Greeks, like
there was a French thing I found actually, yeah, which from the 1700s, which said, "Never shall man be free until the last king has been strangled with the entrails of the last priest," which I thought was.
Had to be the French.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, his name looks French to me. Diderot. I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I guess Les Mis was happening around the same time as Hamilton. this is history by musicals. Which
well, I know, or history by films. I don't know if you ever find it. I watch a film and I'm like, I don't know anything about that. So then I Wikipedia it just to find out what happened. And
I've missed most historical films because I'm reading Wikipedia through most of it.
I know nothing about this particular war or skirmish or political incident or yeah, that's the depth of my historical knowledge at place. But yeah.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. Where were we? I've completely forgotten where we were.
We were talking about freedom, and freedom from and freedom for was kind of the main thing we've been talking about, and where did freedom come from, and the kind of historical stuff.
There we go. That's the one. So we used the illustration last week of like it's not ours, stole it from somewhere, I forget where, but like a fish out of water isn't free, is dying. It's this thing of actually like freedom comes from the right constraints and the right conditions, and I think one of the films that demonstrates this beautifully is WALL-E. So as a big Pixar fan, I do love WALL-E. My wife Lizzie hates it because it hasn't got words. It's kind of like a silent film from modern era. It's such a beautiful film. Absolutely love it. But the whole thing is that actually you've got these two robots who star Evie and WALL-E. WALL-E is like just cleaning up Earth because it's become overrun and destroyed. And the last humans have escaped on basically like intergalactic cruise ships where they just get entertained the whole time, and they sit in these little pods with like entertainment screens in front of them, and they float around and they just have to ask for food and it's brought to them. And WALL-E managed to get himself on one of these international kind of cruise, like space cruise ship type things. And he kind of like innocently disrupts this whole world and starts knocking over these floating pods. And so these enormously, grossly massive human beings who have never done any exercise and they can't use their legs end up rolling around the floor. And then they notice for the first time there's other people kind of next to them. And they start to discover the world, and then they go back to Earth and they start to discover, planting things and doing work and all this kind of stuff. And it's all, it's kind of, it's for such a sweet film, it's actually quite a cutting critique of like Western culture right now, of like, just like eating and gorging and entertaining ourselves to death, and actually how that isn't freedom. It leaves us, unable to move in the extreme, unable to recognize there's another human being next to us. And actually like we need conditions to flourish. And some of those conditions are like working and connecting with other human beings. And not eating absolutely everything we want to eat, and as many of us have experienced. And so actually this sweet little Pixar film is actually kind of pointing towards the fact that if we do everything we want to do, we have this total freedom, it leads to our destruction. And it's just this, like right now on the BBC website, there is I think it's one of the top 10 stories today actually, is kind of Nick Cave talking about cancel culture. So Nick Cave's a kind of musician and poet, and you might know him from duetting with Kylie Minogue back in the 90s. If you remember that, that was a kind of odd song. But anyway, but he's talking about basically how cancel culture has become the worst of religion, and it's just a fascinating quotes in it, basically all of which I would basically agree with. He's saying, now the moment someone says something wrong, people like cancel them. They're over. That's it. They're kind of destroyed. He says, like the worst of religion, there's no chance of redemption. There is no mercy for them. Cross the line and you're over. And it's interesting that he calls it religion. So again, it's this idea that religion is the oppressive force of all the rules and the things that takes away your humanity. But cancel culture came out of a culture that was supposed to safeguard individual freedoms. that was actually supposed to be all about people should be free to do whatever they want to do, and so therefore you shouldn't encroach on their space. And now it's become like this like online fueled war where anyone who seems to have crossed the line is like over, like literally losing jobs, businesses losing income, having to lay off people, you know. So it's kind of, it has, in Nico's words, and I would agree, become like this really oppressive force with no redemption and no mercy. And so like a little bit like Wally, where total freedom leads to a lack of freedom, it's kind of our own attempts to preserve individual freedoms have led to the opposite. It's led to this kind of group state mentality that kind of actually oppresses anyone's ability to, you know, make a mistake, let alone say whatever they want to say, type thing. And so it kind of, it's this paradox where total freedom leads to captivity. And actually, you know, if we move on to what Christianity would say to this whole thing about rules and regulations and repression and freedom and all that kind of thing, it kind of, I would say, believes in the opposite paradox, that when you have the right restrictions, the right rules, the right conditions, under that, people actually flourish. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, it often gets thrown at religions, especially Christianity, is, you know, don't force it on anyone, don't put a shit down my throat. And actually to even tell someone else about your faith is somehow an oppressive act, and people should be free to think what they think. And there was a survey done last year, I think it was, basically how like young Christians are really unlikely to share their faith and actually see it as an immoral thing to share their faith now, because it's seen as kind of repressing the others. And did you read that, Andy, didn't you? That kind of this idea.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I thought it was fascinating.
Yeah, this whole thing that actually, you know, it's gotten to the point where actually sharing your faith would be immoral, which is interesting. I'm reading the biography of someone who suffered immensely so that people in China could hear about Christianity, and gave his, you know, his life up, and lost family members, lost friends, you know, everything, gave everything for this because he was so passionate that other people should have the opportunity to hear it. But now he would be seen as a bad guy. And there's it's really fascinating quote from Bishop Azaria, who's the first Anglican bishop in India. So he's talking back in the 1930s about this issue. So this isn't like super new. This idea that bringing Christianity to other people is actually oppressive has been around for a little while. And he said Christianity was criticized as a colonial oppressive religion. So this idea that, you know, the British, along with, you know, unfairly, you know, ruling India and stripping of its assets and all this thing. Not only that, but they're bringing this oppressive religion with them. But then he goes on to say, Christianity has brought us fellowship and brotherhood. It has treated us with respect, and it has given us self-respect. It's never despised us because of our lowly origin, but on the contrary has held us as individuals who are valuable before God, and man as any man of any origin. Best of all, Christianity has given us happiness and joy that can only come by the knowledge that the Lord has forgiven our sins and made us his children in Christ. This has been the result of constant teaching, care, and instruction. It's been accomplished, moreover, because we ourselves, freed by Christ from chains of ignorance and fear, have found within ourselves new courage, new hope, new strength to struggle upward. Which is amazing. So this guy, he's you know, from India, he's the first bishop in India, is basically saying, you know, everyone's telling me that we're being repressed by Christianity, but I've never been so free. It's, you know, it's the same words as my friend Nigel saying, you know, I avoided Christianity for a long time because I thought it was rules and regulations, but now I've made the jump. I've never been so free. I remember one of our lecturers in college, the wonderful Adrian Chatfield, was telling us a story of some slaves in the Caribbean who, upon hearing about Christianity and the message of Jesus, walked away from their slavery. Basically, they'd heard the message that in Jesus they were free, and so they took it very literally, and they literally just walked away. They were not slaves anymore, which is pretty amazing. You know, someone who's like very quickly internalized what the message of Jesus kind of is about. So what do you think, Andy, about this idea of these paradoxes that actually total individual freedom leads to some kind of like captivity and oppression, and actually the presence of the right conditions, the right message, the right teaching actually leads to freedom.
Yeah. So I think there was, I think there was the thing, wasn't there, that in a TED talk where the guy Barry Schwartz was talking about that, and he basically said, if you remove all constraints on people, actually it's not good for them at all. I can't remember what the TED talk was called, but it was basically saying that. So I think that definitely would seem to be the case. And then I think in the right sort of the right sort of constraints bringing freedom would be what we'd want to talk about. And I think we have to be honest to say that Christianity has got in bed with colonialism at times. It has been a force for oppression. I think the church has done that. We spoke about that a number of weeks ago, and I think we need to own that as well. But I think at the heart of the Christian faith, again quoting a well-known American Christian preacher that gets brought up every now, he says that Christianity is the only religion that claims that God gave up his freedom so that we could experience the ultimate freedom. So we would want to say as Christians that God in Christ came and lived a human life, and he died a death and subsequently was resurrected from the dead. But actually he gave up his freedom in order that we can gain ours. And so that for me is at the heart of the kind of the good news of Jesus. And therefore that seems to be a paradox, that Christ gave up his freedom that we could get it, and therefore we give up our freedom in one sense, and then we receive it in return. And so there does seem to be that paradox at the heart of the Christian faith. And Jesus said, the Son sets you free, you're free indeed. And millions of people throughout history would say the same thing. They'd say, actually, this may look like repression to some of you, but actually in modern language, we could respond and say, well, who are you to tell me that I'm repressed? What gives you the right to tell me that I'm repressed? Because you don't know my heart, you don't know my situation, if you're going to come back in a similar spirit. But actually, many people, and you and I think would want to say the same, that actually we find freedom in the person of Jesus, who gave up his freedom that we could gain ours. And if that sounds nuts, we'd encourage people to look at the claims of Jesus, because so many people have found that to be true in their own lives. And I think that quote from Bishop Azariah from India, these guys were of the lowest caste. They were the not just the untouchables, but I believe they're the unseeables. And the Dalek Christians, there's just been an incredible explosion of the Christian faith, because it's a faith that has given them dignity and self-worth and honor and freedom, really, in their lives. And in terms of within India, there's just been an explosion of the Christian faith, a revival Christians would talk about of the Christian faith amongst them. I think often we think of the Christian faith, as being this Western colonial imposition, and at times we have to hold up our hands and say it has been. But actually, there's been a meme doing the rounds this week that say the average Christian in the world is not a white middle-aged man, it's a black 28 or 27-year-old or 29-year-old woman. Like, that's the reality of the Christian faith. The Christian faith isn't Europe or America, it's South America, it's Africa, it's Asia. That's where these guys they're not coming to our conferences, they're not in our churches because or there's some of them are because they live here, but many people, the kind of center, the gravity of the Christian faith has moved throughout history from the Middle East to Europe to America, and now it's dispersed across the world. And for those guys to hear Western liberals telling them that it's oppressive and it's Western and it's they'll say, wait a minute, we're Christians and we're followers of Jesus and this is our reality. Who are you to tell us? Like, what gives you the right to tell me this is oppressive? Because I found my freedom in Jesus, which I think is a bit of a head jam, really, that you have Western liberals telling other people they're telling persons of ethnic minorities in other countries who would be considered minorities that they're being oppressed. It's like it's a bit of a head jam, really. It's the reversal of people's values, I think, which is what the kingdom of God does.
Yeah, I mean, that's so fascinating, because there's definitely moments where Christians go the opposite way, where it goes wrong, where they themselves are repressed and become a bit of an oppressive force. And exactly as you were just saying, I was listening to an interview with this guy who is kind of like a Christian leader, well known in America, and he was saying, like, when the whole Black Lives Matter thing kicked off this summer, he gave it 2-3 days to think it through, recognizing that he hadn't thought this through well enough. It had taken him off guard. he felt complicit in himself, did some reading, did some listening, and then 2-3 days later, put on his Instagram, which, tons of followers and stuff, basically this, I'm learning, I don't know, I've been complicit in this, I've made mistakes. So he's an older white guy. And then basically what he said, which is so fascinating, is his, black Christians would comment and message him and were gracious and thank you for saying that, really appreciate that, thank you for standing with us, all this kind of stuff. He said the only hatred he got were from, and as he put it, white woke Christians, people who kind of part of this thing that Nick Cave was talking about of enforcing this kind of new religion of justice on people and calling out those who don't do it right. And they're basically, you waited too long. Why are you only saying this now? You're only saying it to look good. They were jumping on him for that. But it was that, the black Christians were actually, oh, thank you for being gracious. Thank you for being humble. This is helpful. But it was the white woke Christians who were shouting at him down and actually kind of destroying him. And it might be helpful to spend a few minutes talking about why is it that sometimes Christianity can go wrong and not become about this freedom to be a human being, but actually can become something that destroys people's personalities, and they can become quite angry people and actually quite oppressive people. And I think it's fascinating that dynamic, because it ties into what you were saying of actually, it's something Lamin Sana, who was a guy who's a Muslim who became a Christian. He was an academic and he pointed out, Christianity doesn't have a center. It doesn't have a cultural center like other faiths. It moves around. For a while it was Europe, and now it's more South America and Asia, and increasingly Africa. And Christianity seems to go to the people who are at the bottom of the pecking order culturally, whichever nation that may be. So in India, the Dalits, who are the bottom caste, the unseeables, the untouchables, it'll go to the poorest countries. It'll do well in those countries with the unimportant. And actually those who maybe in terms of their culture and the world have a high status, they tend to struggle perhaps more with Christianity than those at the bottom. And thinking of, in Jesus' time, he could, one of his encounters, which is recorded in the Gospels, is with this guy who is just recorded as a rich young ruler. So we don't know his name. We know he's wealthy. He's important.
So he's been remembered throughout the last 2,000 years. He's just a rich young ruler.
Yeah. He's just this guy who's wealthy and powerful and important. And young. So he's done it all at a young age as well. Really
young Mark Zuckerberg, maybe.
Yeah, totally ticked all the boxes. And basically Jesus goes, yeah, it's great, you can follow me, but you have to get rid of everything you own first, and then you can follow me. And it was almost like you can't have all of that privilege and power and wealth and follow me. It's almost like the two are incompatible. Is there something in that? Is there something in the fact that the powerful can get Christianity wrong more than the less powerful?
Yeah, I think there is. And I guess Jesus, one of the things he kind of railed against, and you hear in churches, is this idea of legalism, that we turn God's grace, God's unmerited favor, God's love towards humanity, that is a gift that we receive, we begin to turn it into kind of law and rules. And I think we're all liable to do that, because we don't like the idea of not having to work for something. We don't like the idea of having to receive something freely. It kind of leaves us vulnerable. It kind of leaves us thinking, is there a catch here? There's something in you. It also leaves us without anything to boast about, because you've just received it freely. It puts everybody on the same level. So whether you're a king or a beggar, actually, both of us receive Jesus on our knees, really saying, look, God, we surrender to you as king, and therefore we want your grace and your forgiveness. And so it levels the playing field. And actually, there's something in us as human beings that doesn't like that, And so I think if you're already effectively on your knees and surrendered because your life is screwed, then I suspect it makes it easier to receive Jesus. Well, I mean, we've seen it in prisons, we've seen it in all kinds of different situations. If you've got you realize that Jesus is all you need when Jesus is all you've got, type thing. But actually, if you have power and you have and I guess, within worldly terms, you and I, we're white, we're weird, aren't we? White, industrialized, educated, rich, democratic, the kind of that weird an acronym which people use to describe us. We would fall into that. I think it's harder, for us really, and I think we do have a tendency to turn the grace of God into rules and regulations that we have to obey, and obviously there are kind of commands in the scriptures. There are things in there, but we turn it into I think we can turn it into a pecking order. We can turn it into looking down on people. Jesus, didn't he, told stories about looking at the plank in your eye before you look at the speck in somebody else's. It's always easier to look at somebody else and say they've got it wrong, rather than looking at ourselves and say, do you know what, I need to repent first. And some cheesy Christian things that say, if you point the finger at somebody, there's 3 pointing back at you. But it's true. We have to kind of. I remember, Rick Warren was said, about something to do. He's an American pastor about sin, and he says, well, the Bible talks a lot about my personal sin. It's not about me going and pointing at everybody else's issues. The Bible convicts me of my sin, and I think we get into big problems when we start using it as a hammer to hit over, other people's heads. It actually should convict us and lead us to our knees to say, say sorry to God. That should be the response of the Christian faith, and then we work out of seeking justice for the oppressed and the marginalised because of the grace we've received. But if we start using it as a something to hit people over the head with and forcing people to obey rules and regulations, we are in big trouble and not in the attitude of receiving grace. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think there's something in the fact that, if, like you're saying, Alpha in prisons, so this course that we love about, discovering Christianity, it runs in prisons, and it's this thing of like, it does well. I mean, in part because people in prison just desperate to do anything.
Myself, even if I have to do a Jesus course, I will. Yeah, like if it gets me time out, I'll do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just give me something to do. So, there's that. But it's also this sense of like, if you're in prison, generally speaking, you don't need to be told that there's something wrong with you and you've done stuff wrong. If you're really poor, you don't need it explaining to you that you're needy. Like, that's your everyday experience. Whereas actually, if you are rich young rulers, if you're weird, if you're, like near the top of the thing, then actually Christianity is quite a threat to your existing identity. And, that whole idea of like the conditions in which you need to flourish actually start off with quite a humbling, with quite a lowering, with a letting go of a lot of things. And, with that rich young ruler, like literally letting go of his power and his wealth and his connections and all of that kind of stuff, and giving all that up in order to be free. And that was really hard. Or like there's this other guy that Jesus encounters, Nicodemus, who is one of like the elite religious teachers of his day. So elite that he can't be seen going to Jesus, and he does it secretly at night. And Jesus is like, basically, you need to be born again, which is essentially you need to start again. You need to forget everything you think you know. You are a beginner with me, and it's kind of you need to let go of his whole identity of like, I've got all this stuff stacked up. And I think it's just an interesting feature. I've started reading more Christian biographies just because I've never previously done it. I actually found it really helpful. And there's just so many Christians go through this moment where they never really got that this whole thing's a gift and it's free. And they understood it intellectually, but they never really felt it. They never really got it. They never really let it into their lives. And that nearly every time before that, they were harsh, they were critical, they were hard on themselves. And then when they finally get it, it's like that's when the freedom comes. That's when they're actually kind of like liberated. And so this guy, I'm reading about, Hudson Taylor, who's passionate about making sure that everyone in China had heard about Jesus. He went through that same experience where one day he finally got it. It's actually not about how good or badly I perform in this. It genuinely is just about staying with Jesus. Like that's it. Like that's the whole point of it. And it like once it hit him, it kind of changed him. And then the people who worked with him, it changed all them, apart from, I love it, his wife, who already got it. And she was like slightly bemused that no one else had kind of like, did you not get
always the way?
Yeah, there's always like the wife always knows better.
Yeah.
Gutted if she didn't hear me say that. But it's kind of like, it is this whole thing of actually like, almost like when you let go of all of that stuff, when you let go of the achievement stuff, that's when you get it. And that's kind of like finally when the freedom comes. It's in this actual letting go, which is I won't go into that, but just because we got 5 minutes left. I was about to go down a hole of the rabbit hole. I'm going to leave it. But say like, yeah, kind of at the same time, we recognize, there are a lot of Christians who don't get that and who actually are incredibly critical of others and of themselves. And that whole grace thing hasn't sunk in yet. And I would recognize with myself, it's kind of like, I'm always learning that. And I will still be critical of myself and critical of others, even if I won't share it with them type thing. And like that thing is still kind of like working on me in that sense. There's still a bit of breaking down to be done.
Yeah. And I think, one of my favorite pastors years ago, he used to say the way in is the way on. The way into Christian faith is through grace. It's through the free, unmerited favor of God. But actually the way on in the Christian faith is the free, unmerited favor of God. Like actually, so often people who are Christians, they kind of know that we come to, we follow God through Jesus' death on the cross and his resurrection and us, submitting our life to him. But often then they feel like they have to go and earn it. And actually grace is the way on as well. And I think all of us, because nothing in life is free, we're always looking for the catch. We always want to prove ourselves. We always play the comparison game. And actually, this is another thing that we, that Christians believe, that this brings us freedom from those things. And we have to, because it's so countercultural, and we're not immune to the culture, and we've got our own sinful hearts and all those sorts of things. We have to keep coming back. And it's one of the reasons that Christians read the Bible, is that actually God's truth shapes us in a different way to the narratives of film and music and those sorts of things, because it speaks a different truth over our lives. And we have to continue to be reminded about that, because, well, for those reasons, really.
And it's, we've said in previous episodes that Jesus was often contrasting himself favorably with the other religious movements of his day. And one of, I think, maybe his teaching that speaks most to this paradox of freedom is where he said, come to me, everyone who is worn out and burnt out, and I'll give you rest. And the line is, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's this thing that seems, again, like a paradox to us, that he's saying, if you need a rest, I will give you work. And it's this idea of that we always wear some kind of backpack. We always are guided by something. We're always owned by something. And it's being owned and carrying the burden that's right for us and right fitting. And so it's kind of like we can never get away from the fact that we will always be owned by something. We'll always be controlled by something, whatever we give ourselves to. But the way of Jesus, the way of freedom, like, he explicitly wants to say, in contrast to religion and the religious movements of his day, that his way is light and easy. So it's kind of like, it is the paradox of like, it's the right restrictions for freedom. And we would say Jesus is the restrictions that bring the greatest freedom. It's that kind of paradox.
It's good.
So Andy, the time hath flown.
It does, yeah. We're just come up to the hour, which is about time to call it a day.
It is. So it's been an hour. It's again flown by. It's been such a good thing to talk about, and thank you to everyone who joined us on such a warm evening. It's fantastic to have you with us. Or if you're watching again later, thank you so much for giving time to this. As always, sorry.
Hello in the future. It's just a weird thought, but
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, if there is one, given the way that 2020 is going, that's a future episode, actually, isn't it? Anyway. Yeah, we can talk about that in the future. But as always, we love to actually talk about people's real questions and the things that genuinely they're curious or skeptical about with Christianity. So if you do have one of those, either message me through the Storyhouse Facebook page or through our website, or to Andy through the St. Francis Mackworth Facebook page, Instagram, website, etc. And so do messages if you want to get in on that in future. And thank you so much for joining us. If you found tonight helpful, do give us a like or a love and a share. Pass it on to your friends and family and complete strangers. That would be great. Anyone you know who would find this useful. My name is Dave. I am at Storyhouse, which is a church and coffee shop in Crosby, North Liverpool. If you want to find out more about us, check out our YouTube, Facebook, and website. And Andy, you are... Where?
We've just so we're in Mackworth, edge of Derby, and we have just moved here with a whole bunch of people to revitalise and re-energise an existing church on an estate here. And we're loving life in Mackworth. It's a wonderful place to be. People are friendly, and lots of opportunities are coming up for church. So we would love to engage with you if you're in anywhere near the Derby area. We'd love to connect.
Great, and they can find you
at STF Mackworth.
Wonderful. And at the moment, I believe some painted stones around the Mackworth area.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We got creative. Apologies if anybody got my ones. Mine are probably of a slightly less quality than others that were done. But it's the thought that counts, isn't it?
Isn't it just? So yeah, once again, thank you for joining us this evening, and we will see you again next week.